everyone, welcome back to my channel. We're going to continue here with the many blog posts that I had posted up at my personal site for, well, not my personal site, it's the official site for my book, The Sleeper Agent, The Rise of Lyme Disease, Chronic Illness, and the Great Imitator Antigens of Biological Warfare, located at thesleeperagent.com, and will be released on Amazon next Wednesday, December 13th. So there is another article that I'm going to go over today called Blackmail and Biological Warfare, a Tripartite Agreement's Recipe for Disaster. And that title, or the subtitle, is a reference to an off-record, illegal tripartite agreement that was signed by the United States, Russia, and Britain in defiance of international treaties, and it was a tripartite agreement that said they would keep each other's bioweapons violations secret, which highly illegal to make those kind of off-record agreements with another country, violating international treaties. And it was discussed in this book by Ken Alabek called Biohazard, the chilling true story of the largest covert biological weapons program in the world, told from inside by the man who ran it, by Ken Alabek. And he was a defector who defected to the West from the Soviet Union, or as it was collapsing, as the Soviet Union was collapsing in the 90s. He made an escape to the West, defected, and this memoir is his story. And I did talk about this. I did talk about him in my book in chapters 3 and 4. Chapters 3 and 4 are about the Soviet programs, and he talks about this illegal tripartite agreement that was made between Russia, Britain, and the United States. And I'll get into how that came about. But first, I want to give you a little background about him. He was very high up in the Soviet program, and he worked at many different facilities, but he also worked at a very well-known lab called Vector. And he talks about the fact that he was weaponizing things and trying to make biological agents that would cause psychological and neurological disorders. So mental illness and neurological disorders. And he says, and one of the quotes, and this is, I reveal this in my book, he says, the Vector scientists had used a gene for beta-endorphin, a regulatory peptide, in their experiments. Beta-endorphin, capable in large amounts of producing psychological and neurological disorders and of suppressing certain immunological reactions, was one of the ingredients of the Bonfire program, and that was a Soviet bioweapons. It was like the code name of a Soviet biological weapons program. And he also says, I eventually developed psychotropic agents to induce altered mood and behavior in humans. Scientists worked with a number of biochemical substances, including regulatory peptides, establishing a shadowy link with our Bonfire program. Another institute controlled by the Third Directorate, MedStatistica, gathered statistics related to biological research around the world. The Pharmacology Institute specialized in developing toxins to induce paralysis or death. All were connected in some manner to the Flute program, whose principal aim was to develop psychotropic and neurotropic biological agents for use by the KGB in special operations, including the wet work of political assassinations. And actually, it was Eric Traub who was its pioneer, along with the pioneer of stealth weaponry. He pioneered also, because one of his main areas of study, which also ran in parallel with immune tolerance, was the neurotropic disease, or the effect of disease agents to deteriorate the brain and central nervous system. And of course, you're going to get neurological disorders, you're going to get mental health problems, and you name it, like cognitive decline, things like that. So, and if you read my book, I kind of lay out the history of these neurotropic antigens, and not, the great imitator antigen. I am referring to that. It's an immunosuppressive and neurotropic antigen. But back to this. So, there were several defectors that defected the Soviet Union who worked high up in the biological weapons program, and I discussed them in my book. And the first one, his name was Vladimir Pasechnik. He died in 2001. He defected to Britain while the Soviet Union was still the Soviet Union, but he died in 2001, and I believe it was a chemical weapons assassination, where they kind of came back for retribution and killed him. But Ken Alabek, the one who wrote this, was his superior, and I guess Vladimir Pasechnik got his permission to go to France for something, went to France, and then coordinated an escape with British intelligence. And then, after the Soviet Union crumbled, this guy escaped to the United States. But he talked in this book about the fact that when Pasechnik had defected, when the Soviet Union was still the Soviet Union, the West had actually kept it secret from the world. Because this was, when he defected, that was when the United States learned of this massive Soviet biological weapons program, which they had lied about for so many years, and there was an incident at a place called Sverdlovsk where anthrax had escaped a facility, or some kind of accident happened and it killed a lot of people in the nearby village, and that was a bioweapons lab accident that brought attention. In 1979 it happened. It brought a lot of attention on them, but they had maintained that it wasn't related to biological weapons research. They said that it was tainted meat that the villagers ate, when that wasn't true. But they had kept Pasechnik's defection secret. And there's a quote here where they say the West agreed to keep it secret in return for allowing them to go over to the Soviet Union and inspect some of their bioweapons labs, or anywhere that they wanted to inspect. And they told the Soviet Union that they could also do that to the West. They could pick facilities and see and inspect for themselves. With this kind of like this feigned openness, cooperation and openness between enemy countries. But I will read the quote here. It said, and Biopreparat is where he worked. It was a facility or a program. It was the Soviet biological weapons program. It was called Biopreparat. We were told at Biopreparat that the Americans and British had agreed to keep the Pasechnik affair quiet in return for a full Russian response to the diplomatic démarche. Our response was anything but full, but they kept their side of the bargain. Pasechnik's defection became public only after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Why did our rivals cooperate in guarding our secret? Disclosure of the information Pasechnik gave them would have caused us more harm than a dozen Sverdlovsks, like that accident. After I settled in the United States, a senior official who had served in President Bush's administration told me American and British leaders believed that a public quarrel would endanger progress in other areas of arms control and perhaps weaken Gorbachev. They were also convinced that their covert pressure would force us out of the biological warfare business. The West's diplomatic tact may have seemed sensible at the time, but it gave us unexpected breathing space. We continued to research and develop new weapons for 2 more years. So, and that's kind of a vague statement to say that a public quarrel, they thought a public quarrel would endanger progress in other areas of arms control and perhaps weaken Gorbachev. And the more likely scenario, and actually I've confirmed this with John Loftus and what his sources were saying, is that it became kind of like this perpetual blackmail. If they were going to bring out this information about the Soviet Union and their bioweapons program, there would be a response. And then things could get really ugly. See, they have a lot of dirt on the Americans and all of the bioterror attacks that happened in the Cold War. And, you know, people like Eric Traub and all of the blunders that were made covering the because there's what are called simulant tests that were done in the 50s, and actually they still continue today. Simulant, not stimulant as in coffee, simulant, S-I-M, simulate, like a simulation. So what it was is that they would take these so-called harmless bacterial microbes and they would spray them in open air tests and then kind of gauge how it would spread out. And they did this nationwide, and they were doing this over populated areas, and people actually died as a result of it. And these simulant tests, these open-air simulant tests, I cover in chapter 11 of my book. There's a whole chapter on it called Vector Weapons and Simulant Attacks. And there was a lot of bioterror attacks that were actually hidden under that as secret acts of sabotage. And they hit us many, many times over, kind of like the Day X that Alexander Kuzminov in his book Biological Espionage, which I talked about in my last video, the Day X, which he said meant a large-scale war of bioterrorism against the West. And it looks like that was the Day X. During those early days of the simulant program, but there were all sorts of accidents that happened, and so the Soviet Union had all that information. And if the West started to make those accusations, well, the Soviet Union had a lot of accusations they too could make to the against the Americans in the Western countries, because there was also a three-way cooperation in Western countries between Britain, United States, and Canada, and they all kind of did the same tests. So Britain also did these simulant tests, and Canada did, and they all were kind of in the early days of the Cold War. British intelligence was highly compromised, and it led to the defection of what is today known as the Cambridge Five spies. Donald MacLean, it's just Donald MacLean, Kim Philby, and there was a few other guys, but Donald MacLean and Kim Philby being the most important ones, because they actually were fundamental in setting up NATO and had a lot to do with the United Nations, and they defected to the Soviet Union upon being found out, and those were the guys that were responsible for getting people like Eric Traub over to the United States to work for the United States. And I go into that in my book. I'm not going to give too much away here, but this was the pretext for this off-record illegal tripartite agreement between Russia, United States, and Britain, and that the agreement said that they would not expose each other's bioweapons violations. Meaning, so you think of it like this: two people that are enemies that want to fight each other, right? Let's say they're in a public place, and or they're somewhere, and they start fighting, fist fighting, and someone walking by is about to call the police, and they quickly, stand up and wipe themselves off and pretend that they're not fighting and pretend to be friends so that person will go away. And then they say, well, let's go somewhere where nobody can see us so we can continue this fight, but no one can rat on us. It's kind of like that, in a way. They're basically saying, we'll turn our back on this international treaty for each other, even though we're enemies, so that none of our dirt is exposed and we can continue this senseless, brutal war of biological weapons. That's essentially the idea in a nutshell. And like I said in another article, is that a lot of nefarious activity was hidden under the guise of scientific, medical, and agricultural research to cloak its nefarious activities, and the signing of this so-called Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention Treaty of 1972 gave all nations the pretext to actually expand their offensive research by just saying that it was defensive work. So this is all stuff that is described very well in my book, and I mean there's a lot of information here, so it might be kind of heavy for a lot of people, and I get it that it's not very fun to know about this stuff, but the more people know about this, the less that this stuff can continue, because I mean basically what this shows is that our own country in the West, our own country, the higher ups are okay with putting national security at serious risk to cover for their own blunders, and using the guise of national security to hide secrets that they don't want people to know, that is actually compromising national security. So these are serious matters. And while I'm not entirely thrilled about having to cover any of this, and believe me, it is kind of concerning that I have to kind of hurl myself in the lion's den here to tell people about this, but the world is so effed as it is that, like I said in another video, if you don't try to put your efforts into making this place a better world, then there's no hope. But when people are motivated and people have talents and they use their talents for good, it can do a lot. And that's what I put my talents into, was putting this book together. I hope for the best, but I expect the worst. So that's it. I'll leave it here. And in other video, I think there's only like 3 more articles left. 2 of those is on the phenomenon of immune tolerance, and 1 of those is on the weaponization of Lyme disease and ticks. So we'll continue with those in the coming days. And with that said, everybody, take care of yourself, be yourself, build yourself, and I will see you on the other side.